Thank you for joining me for another video. And if this is your first video, my name is Raelan, and I'm going to be talking today about being a parent while facing a condition like chronic fatigue syndrome or ME, POTS, fibromyalgia, long COVID, any of these chronic health conditions that can make parenting even more challenging than it already is. I do not have children, so I cannot speak to you from the perspective of a parent. But I did grow up with a parent who was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. My mother became unwell when I was about 5 years old, and her health, unfortunately, just continued to progressively deteriorate for the remainder of her life. And I've thought about doing this video for a very long time, talking about what it's like being the child of someone who is chronically unwell. But I've held back because although I have a lot of good memories, it also was incredibly hard for all of us. And it's hard to revisit those times. And also, as hard as my parents tried, and they did, they're wonderful people and they were wonderful parents, they were in impossible circumstances. So not all of my memories are good. All right, so I'm going to dive into this, but as I do, one, if you haven't already subscribed, I invite you to consider subscribing. I've got a lot of great stuff coming up. This way you're not going to miss it. Plus it helps me out a lot and I would very much appreciate it. I still notice every single new subscriber that I get. So it means a lot to me when you subscribe, and I love having more and more people join this tribe of ours here. And the second thing is I cannot reiterate enough that my parents are wonderful people and they did the best they could. And I recognize that I had so many gifts and so much love and support that unfortunately many other people do not get, even from healthy parents. I know it would have meant the world to my mother to, I feel like we're doing this video together a little bit, to be able to, to connect with other people who are facing similar things. And I do this on behalf of both of us. For me, growing up as a child of a parent with chronic fatigue syndrome was a gradual getting used to things because her condition came on gradually. So in the beginning, it was more mild and got more and more severe as time went on. And as her illness got worse, as her health got worse, of course, the strain and the tension and the friction and the stress in our family increased pretty much along the same rate. My mother, by the end, was almost completely housebound. When she did leave the house, she needed to do so in a wheelchair. She was often bedbound. She spent the vast majority of her time of the day in bed. She was severely depressed and hopeless after years of not making any progress with her health, despite all the things that she'd tried and all the research that she'd done. And eventually she did end up taking her own life. This was in 2007. And leading up to that point, she had a high reliance on myself and especially my father for all forms of her care and support. We were pretty isolated by the end for many years, actually, from most of our family. There weren't really family friends. So all of the emotional, and daily support was coming from us. I'll start with what I remember feeling as a child. I remember feeling frustrated a lot of frustration around just our circumstances. It seemed like there were too many things that we couldn't do, too many things that I couldn't do. I felt like I was hearing no a lot, probably something that every child feels regardless of their circumstances. But I remember my mom saying to me a lot in response to things that I wanted us to do, me to do. Her response was, "I'm sick." And she'd say it with such frustration and such anger, which is understandable, probably because she's had to say this to me 10,000 times and I still don't seem to get it. But when I wanted to do something, it was like, "I'm sick." Like I grew to loathe those words. They were like poison being poured into me. It certainly never helped. It just served to make my frustration with everything that was happening so much worse. As a child, I remember feeling like those words were an excuse, like it was, "I won't do this," or "we won't do this," instead of I can't do this or we can't do this. I know now that that, of course, was not the case. I'm sure my mother wanted nothing more than to be able to do these things that I wanted to do. But as a child, I just didn't get it. So from my experience and from reflection on this whole childhood of mine since, there are things that helped me as a child, and then things that looking back, I know or I suspect could have helped me as a child. So I'll share those with you. One thing would have been keeping the focus on what we as a family could do instead of on what we couldn't. Now, again, this is just my memory and my perspective, but I don't remember a lot of that focus, and that would have been really helpful for me. Now, I know this is a tall order because I'm asking this of a sick parent who's just trying to keep her own head above water, but having more frequent and open conversations around what was happening would have been really helpful for me. Framing it in a way that I as a child could understand, perhaps referencing it back to, like, for example, when you're in elementary school, I remember I got mumps at the end of the year, and it was during the worst possible week. It was the last week of school. We were doing a class party. We were doing a field trip. I missed out. Like, there was something every single day. It was just a week-long celebration, and I had to stay home for all of it. And I wanted to be there so badly, but I couldn't because I was sick. So I'm not sure if anyone ever tried to explain it to me this way, but I think it would have been helpful to use examples like that. Like, remember when you were sick and you really wanted to be there and your friends were disappointed and you were disappointed, but there's nothing you could do. That's what happens to mom all of the time. This is what it's like for me all of the time. And as much as possible, making sure that those conversations aren't emotionally charged. I remember a lot of frustration and anger from my mother, again, understandably, because of what she was going through. But it was, I think, even harder for me as a child to take it in when there was so much negative emotion infused into, at least I remember, a lot of our conversations around what was happening. I also think it's important to shelter children as much as possible from the hard and the scary parts. And I get what a big ask this is, because kids are around you all of the time. They literally live with you. So I know it's not something that can be done 100%. And I'm sure my parents did a lot of it, especially when I was younger. But I remember so much stress in my family. I remember watching my mom cry all of the time. And it was a lot as a child to process and be able to deal with. And yes, there was a lot that my mother couldn't do with me. But for me, her time in whatever that looked like was precious to me. And I didn't really see the difference in her watching a movie with me or her taking me to the park. I have so many great memories of her on the couch and me making this bed on the floor and us watching movies together. And we'd watch the same ones over and over, and we knew the lines. And there was just a tradition and a ritual around it. And I really valued that time with her. I imagine in the moment she was feeling guilty and wishing she could do more, but I just loved every second of it. Every second of it. I also think that getting outside help is absolutely essential if you can manage it in some way. I don't remember anybody from the outside helping us. I know that my mother, I think, pushed some people away in our family when they didn't seem to understand what was happening. She didn't like having strangers in her home, so she didn't want to hire people to come in and help and take the caregiver burden off my father and myself. But our home became like a pressure cooker. The tension, the stress, the depression, the anxiety, walking around on eggshells, it became so bad in our home. And my poor father had so much on him. And I just think it could have made a world of difference if there had been some outside people involved that could have helped out with all of this. So the outside support, of course, goes for, household things, physical care needs, helping with meals and so forth, but also outside emotional support would have helped us a ton. I felt like I was one of the only two emotional support people in my mother's life. And it felt like she put a lot on me. Probably not when I was a child, but as I grew older, teenager, early adulthood, I felt like my job was to be her counselor, to be her support. And I recall at one point, as her depression was getting really severe, her saying to me that I needed to spend, a minimum of 3 hours with her per day, just sitting, talking to her, hanging out with her. Otherwise, she would take her own life. She said, I'm just being blunt. This is what I need. 3 hours a day from you. So 3 hours a day, I sat next to her and just listened and talked. And often she was crying. And it was just a lot to put on a child. And I think I was probably 20 years old by this point. So I was already technically an adult. But I don't think, this is my opinion, the parents should ever put that stuff on their children. I don't think that's ever a child's job, no matter what the child's age is. So finding that emotional support from other places would have helped us a lot. Another thing was around the sort of rules or unspoken rules about what we as a family could and couldn't do. And of course, it's important to find things that we can all do together as a family. It was important for my mother to be included. I think when you as a parent are severely unwell, it's also important, as hard as it might be, to encourage your family to do some things without you, to let them know that that's okay, that sometimes the unwell parent has to stay home and doesn't get to take part. The message with my mother as I grew older became very clear that a good daughter, a good husband, would stay with her, that we would sit out all activities until she was able to take part as well, whether that be weddings or, family get-togethers. My dad and I even, when I was a teenager and in my early 20s would go out for lunch, and sometimes we just wouldn't tell her because she was very jealous of that time that we got together, that time that she didn't get to be a part of. And although that's understandable, I had so much guilt as a teenager and a young adult around just getting to live, around getting to spend time with my father outside of our home. So as much as possible, as hard as it might be, I think it's important to encourage your family to go out and to do those things, and that it's okay. And you understand and you support it and you want them to do it. Okay, this is a lot. This feels very emotionally heavy for me to talk about. It's still hard even now to revisit these times. So those are some of the ideas and strategies that for me as a child and an adolescent and young adult that would have been helpful. Now, I'd also like to share some of the things that I personally struggled with as a child. One of the biggest things that I struggled with was that I didn't feel like, ironically, I had any right to feel or experience struggle. Like any of this was allowed to be hard for me. I thought that my mother was the one who was unwell. So she was the one who had the raw deal. She was the one who had all of this piled on her. I was healthy. I could live my life. So I had no right to complain. I had no right to feel stressed about it. And anytime I did, I'd feel so guilty. And I just think, she's the one who's sick. Like, I have no right to anything in my life but gratitude, which is a really unrealistic way to live your life. Obviously, this was extremely stressful on me, on my family, and this impacted me massively. But in my young, immature mind, I didn't see that I had a right to accept that and deal with it and process it. I just pushed it away, like, nope, nope, nope. I think more conversations with me as a child around saying, from my mother to say to me, I know that this illness is happening to me, but it's also happening to you. This impacts you. This is hard on you. You are going to need extra support. You are going to need people to talk to and to help you through this, because this is affecting all of us. And it's okay if some days you're not okay, or some days you want to cry, because this is hard for you too. Just validating that would have made, I suspect, a really big difference for me. So those are some of the things that I struggled with. The things that I remember appreciating, some of the things that I thought really helped, were my mother and father, but especially my mother, put a lot of effort into family traditions, holidays, birthdays, Christmas. We would listen to Christmas music for about 5 weeks, and the same records. It was still records back then, every single year. And I loved it. I loved that we put out those same records every year, and that we had our favorite songs and I knew all the words. She somehow managed to always get me a homemade cake on my birthday. I imagine some years she was making it, some years my dad was making it, but that made a lot to me. So keeping in place some traditions throughout the year was massive for me. My mother's words also meant a lot to me. She, despite her struggles and despite perhaps putting some unfair or unrealistic expectations on me as a child, as her child, she said a lot of amazing things as well. And I knew that she meant it. I had no doubt that she loved me fiercely. I don't think she could have loved me more. I don't think she could have been more proud of me. And I knew this. I knew this to my core. She made me feel loved. So even if you can't do all the things you want to do, volunteer at school, take kids on outings, they can still feel loved and supported and get all of that they need, that love that they need from their mother or father, even if that person is in bed or on the couch. My mother also, it's crazy. This is still so hard to talk about. My mother, even though she was so weak and so unwell, modeled strength for me, how to be strong, how to speak your mind, how to, as a woman, make sure that you are equal and heard and valued. She was such a force in our home, such a beacon of independence and strength, which speaks volumes that she was able to do this while so exhausted and so unwell. So I suspect sometimes parents feel that they can't be the role models that they want to be because they can't live the life they want to live. They can't show through actions. But my mom showed me to be strong. I always knew that people, and women specifically, should be independent, should speak their mind, should speak with confidence. And I got that from her. And the last thing I'll share that she taught me, which has really served me well in my life, is that she taught me empathy. She always got me to think about the other person's perspective. If I was complaining about someone or judging someone for their actions, for behaving in a way that I didn't think was right, she always, to the point where it was frustrating, but I get why she did it, got me to think about their perspective and always reminded me that I had no idea what that person was going through. So I learned so much empathy from her. I learned so many great things from her, despite her being so unwell. So that's it. That is my insight, my experience, as best as I can share it at this point in my life on what it's like to be a child growing up with a parent who is unwell. For all of you parents out there, I just want to send you so much love and so much respect. I can't even begin to imagine how difficult this is for you, how much guilt there is, how much frustration, how much exhaustion, and how much you do that your children don't see or appreciate, just like me, all the things that I wasn't able to include in this video because I just don't know. I didn't know that they were happening. So you are awesome. You are a rock star, and your children will know that you love them, and they will have good memories of you as a parent, and you will teach them how to be a good adult regardless of your health limitations. So it just seems like parents have so much guilt piled on them even when they're healthy. So whatever you can do to chisel some of that guilt away, I really hope that you can find a way to do it, because we're all just doing our best, and every parent, every family has limitations to deal with, and this just happens to be yours. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, tap that like button, and I'll see you in the next video.